Well, it's ladies, gentlemen, children of all ages. It's Wake Up Mintzy coming to you, not live, as always, from the Barstool Chicago office. It's a lovely Tuesday morning. I'm in a great mood. What's not to freaking love, boys? We're on a damn heater. Life's good, man. Just crushing the DraftKings. Football season's in we're getting near the holidays. There's just good spirit and vibes in the air. And as always, keep up the good spirits. We've got Dude Wipes. Let it rip with Dude Wipes. Take it over the toilet paper world. It's a revolution. Amazon, Target, Walmart, all over the World Wide Web. Let it rip with Dude Wipes. And got a little holiday bundle coming. There's going to be some holiday tidings of comfort and joy coming from Dude Wipes soon. Chugging some Stella Blue coffee on this fine Tuesday morning. We're going to be joined, well, first of all, as always, Tyler Moody holding down the fort in Louisiana. We're going to be joined by, I got to say, one of my mentors in the sports media world, Stephen Godfrey, fellow Ole Miss Rebel, and has long-standing ties to my hometown of Monroe, Louisiana. And good morning, Mr. Godfrey. How are you?
Mentor, that's terrifying. I don't know if that's terrifying for you or me.
Man, I
I
gotta
would
be
say
honest.
you more.
No, I gotta be honest. I mean, obviously, we have I don't know how you could be more polar opposites in the media world than what we do, but just to give a quick
Yeah.
little background on Steven before we get to the college football, he's one of the top college football writers in the country. Split Zone podcast, huge following. Wrote The Bag Man, all about back in the day when you couldn't legally pay recruits, even though that never really stopped anybody. But I'll make this quick because I'm going to pump his tires for a second. And I know he's like low key and doesn't love it. But when I got into sports
No.
radio, what's up? No, well, he married a Monroe girl I grew up with, like two houses down. And when I got into sports radio in 2015, he's kind of, I mean, honestly, I've come to you with a lot of stuff, just how to navigate the media world from Bossier Radio to ESPN Baton Rouge to now Barstool. And you've been awesome to me. So we've been friends, I guess, 15 years now. And just want to say I appreciate it. And then now we can talk college football.
I'm, I'm very proud. I'm very proud of you because I don't know of anyone that I've like. I had a lot of people reach out and say like, "Oh, I want to work in sports media," and I've had a lot of people say like, "Oh, I think I want to do this." And I don't know if I've ever heard you say that before. It's just you are, and if anybody's listening to this who wants to get into this industry, you just did it. They're like, I didn't do anything. I just told you maybe like what, maybe aim it in this direction, depending on what what the conversation was. But Mintz is, you are the definition of a self-starter, sir.
Yeah,
You are,
I appreciate that. The
you're a high
first
motor. I think everybody that you work with probably knows that, but you're a high motor individual.
I think I'm lucky I landed here at Barstool where it's like you can just let your freak flag fly because I'm not a guy that could ever wear a suit every day or corporate. So I found the right fit here. Kind of got lucky with that. But yeah, man, I appreciate that. I mean, I remember starting my first year in Bossier City, Shreveport, Louisiana. I made like 14 grand doing a 3 hour a day radio show. And I was like, I had like the 50% commission and was making like $8 an hour when I knew 8 people in the region when I moved there. And so I always said, like, they say if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. I think if I could make that situation work, I could make it anywhere.
You can make it in Bossier. You can make it in anywhere.
Yeah, well, like, yeah, especially
Is
on
that
the
what you're
like,
saying?
yeah. I mean, that was a tough year, man. But we grinded and we're here. But so, like I said, I gave you some background on Steven. He's super involved in the college football coaching carousel and industry. Split zone, man. Y'all are tearing it up with your podcast. I know y'all been growing that. And then you're like, what? Do you write for the Washington? But you have like what, 4 jobs? I mean, I can't even keep track.
I have too many jobs. I have too many jobs. I also have a podcast that most people have started to make fun of the title of, which is "Who Killed College Football." And that's you can check that out you can check it out anywhere you get podcasts, but it's wkcfb.com to subscribe. And basically, people say all the time, "Well, college football looks pretty alive to me." That title is based on a comment that Nick Saban made, basically the moment he retired. And so when Saban retires after he loses to Michigan in the semis last year, he goes to Washington D.C. with his boy Ted Cruz, and he just basically starts complaining about the state of college football. And he says, "Hey, look, the college football that I know that I coached in for 40 years no longer exists." And so, we were kind of already working on the show about the state of the sport and how different it is and how strange it is and how there's all these inequities and just how I mean honestly, man, it's like a lot of fans just feel like if you're not in the SEC or the Big Ten, you feel really, really, really left out and sort of ostracized from the way, the sport's going. And I said, perfect. If Nick Saban says it's dead, let's find out who killed it. So that's the show that I've been working on the most this fall.
Hell yeah. Well, so you wrote the bag. You're really well known for writing the Bag Man about the recruiting practices and all the stuff that goes on. Now,
Yeah.
it's legal to pay players. And I'll say this: you always beat the drum, and something I always supported on your end was that the college athletes needed to be paid. I mean, these guys. You've got millions and millions and millions of dollars in TV deals and revenue, and the school making it. So, I know this new world is. I'm all about it. I don't know. These athletes are risking their lives out there. And so I love the new NIL world. I know they're trying to navigate it as far as government and, how to figure out to make it a little less Wild Westy. But I know you've been beaten. I mean, ever since I've known you, you've said this needed to happen. So it's kind of cool to see it happen.
Yeah. And I think that if you go to a major, I think the talking point I had when I wrote that story, which was 10 years ago, was that if you went to a college or you cheered for a college team that was any kind of good, any kind of notable, appeared on television on Saturdays, competed for conference titles or national titles, your school's fan base was in some way, shape, or form compensating players or breaking the rules. And for a long time, I caught a lot of hell for that from, fans at, fan bases like Michigan, or places, for a while it was like kind of the far Northeast. People were criticizing, saying like, oh, that's only a Southern thing. And then as time went on, even in just that 10-year span, pretty much everyone got popped for some version of rule breaking, something compensating players or doing something or cheating, and then of course Michigan has its own problem with improper benefits and gaining advantages, we'll say. And so that mentality shifted. It kind of sucks to be first to the market. Because I took a lot of hell for that when it came out. I mean, I had people say like, you're never going to work with the Southeastern Conference again. And I was like, oh, that's okay. That's kind of what, I feel like if you're pissing off people in power, you're probably doing the right thing. So, I don't feel like vindicated or anything like that. I do think that the market was so suppressed for such a long time. And what I mean by that is like, you can probably throw out an NIL deal that you know about right now, or we can talk about Quinshon Judkins, right? That's a great example.
Yes, fascinating.
And I think he's going to be real. It's going to be really fascinating down the stretch because it looks like both those teams are going to make the playoff. His old team, Ole Miss, and his new team, Ohio State. And he was able to work the market like a free agent. He was able to go out, figure out what the school was going to offer him in one place, figure out what his value was in the entire landscape of college football, and take the best offer. Now, in Judkins' case, it's a little tricky because I would say that NIL as a concept is new, and it may not be handled great by some of the people involved. I'll leave it at that. Like, there's no negotiating window. Like in the NFL, we just say like, hey, the free agency window is opening here. There might be tampering, but like everyone has an agent. They're recognized by the NFLPA. They're recognized by the league. Mintz, enough to know that like it gets a little salty locally when these kids are dealing with some of these schools' NIL collectives. So, but what Ole Miss said was we can replace him in the aggregate. It's kind of like Moneyball, right? Like then he goes on, he's successful at Ohio State. Ole Miss has obviously had a successful season, but none of this could have happened 5-10 years ago. A kid like that probably could have gone to boosters at a school like Ole Miss and pulled down 5%, 10% maybe of what he's making, maybe in cash. That the boosters themselves, hey man, it's not like they can get a receipt for this, right? That's what always cracks me up is like I talk to a lot of college football boosters in the South now, and they're like, dude, at least my accountant's okay with this now. It used to be just having to like dump petty cash into a literal bag and hand it to some guy you knew to go get a deal done with a high school player. So it being above market or above the table in the market is only a good thing.
The Judkins thing is totally fascinating. And so, like, there was a lot of stuff behind the scenes. And it's always, this NIL stuff's always so funny because it's always, like, hushed tones and you hear dollar figures and, I mean, I feel like I'm pretty plugged into it, but I still don't like spreading, like, hearsay rumors. There was a lot of back stuff with him and his mom, and there was a lot of, some stuff going on in the locker room with him. And I heard he went to Ole Miss with, like, a very, very huge number. And they were just like, we can't do this. And then, he got paid pretty good at Ohio State, but I don't think he got the number he asked for at Ole Miss. But then you mentioned the Moneyball thing. Ole Miss,
that's accurate. That's all accurate.
Yeah, and so the Moneyball thing is a fascinating reference, though, because Ole Miss spent the money. You look at the NFL where running backs are like kind of replaceable. Ole Miss spent the money on Walter Nolan and Princely off the edge and Pooh Paul and offensive linemen, and they went for the line of scrimmage with their money instead of Judkins. And look, Judkins is definitely missed. I'm not saying he didn't, especially in the short yardage stuff of that current roster, but it is fascinating to see how it's developed. And like you said, both those teams looking good. I actually went to Ohio State Northwestern at Wrigley Field on Saturday. That was pretty damn cool seeing the Ivy at the football game. I saw Judkins get in the end zone twice. I enjoyed it more when he was wearing the red and blue. But what are you going to do?
It seems like it worked out best for both parties. If you sort of consider there's like not really a salary cap at all, but if you assume a school like Ole Miss has a fixed amount of money, and then Ohio State shifted offensive philosophy this offseason because they brought in Chip. It kind of worked out in the best way possible for both parties because now, I say this now that Ole Miss beat Georgia. I think up until the Georgia game, the financial investment Ole Miss had made to upgrade the defense had not paid dividends. Because look, Ben, I don't have to tell you this. I think they have the worst loss of any of the playoff contenders in the SEC because they blew a fourth and country mile against Kentucky. And if you're familiar with that program at all, that's kind of the story. That's been the story forever, right? It's 4th and 23 against Arkansas a couple of years ago to win the division. So up until the Georgia game, which I do have to say this, like I'm mindful to be extra critical of my alma mater, and I've had to deal with them in some unsavory ways over the years, like from an investigative side. But I was catching a lot of hell from people I work with after that Georgia game because that's the most complete win I've ever seen from that program, probably in my adult life. I don't know if you would disagree.
No, look, I compared it, and you look back, the only game I'd compare it to that was that big of a win in Oxford was the 14 Bama when they were number 1 in early October. But this game, closer, 12-team playoff, close to the playoff thing. And not just that, but, they beat Bama 23-17. That was a game that could go either way. You got the interception by Golson in the end zone. But that was like a coin flip either-or game. This Georgia game was an ass-whipping. Right. And that was the most fun weekend.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like, can you ever recall an ass-whipping like that?
No. Well, the thing is Ole Miss, the front seven thing is just nuts this year. You've got, bringing in Nolan – and then Jared Ivey and Pegues up front with Pooh Paul and Princely and Perkins off the edge. Ole Miss, look, I know the Land Sharks had a great defense in 14 and 15, but this is a level I've never seen. It's crazy. They have the best front seven.
It's the reason why there are, I'm going to get this wrong, 5 2-loss teams and 1 1-loss team. Is that right now, I believe? I just wrote about it last night.
Yeah, Texas is 1 loss, and that's it.
Right. And if A&M beats Texas, which is entirely within the realm of possibility, the other teams win out, you would have 6 2-loss teams. And so before you even worry about who goes to Atlanta or whatever, you've never seen – and within those 2 losses, too, there's this sort of, the chain of upsets where, Ole Miss beats Georgia, who beats Texas, who beats on and on and on. We've never seen anything like that. And I think, you can explain that by using Ole Miss's defensive line, which is that the market is changing the way that rosters are built, but it's also, I think, flattening out like exceptional rosters. So what I mean by that is Walter Nolan came from A&M, right? We're pulling apart some of these rosters in free agency. We just talked about Judkins going to Ohio State. So I think if you're a real player in the game, now everyone's kind of like it's very NFL-esque. College football fans hate it when I say that. They get super pissed off, but it really is. It's much the way that like margins in the NFL are flatter, where you have a really, really terrible team. They're still going to play you to within 2 possessions more than likely, right? We don't have a lot of blowouts in the NFL.
No, that's you're pointing on something I've been harping on too. Is there was a conversation I had with my old boss at ESPN Baton Rouge, Gordy Rush. This was Ole Miss LSU weekend. And he talked about that exact point. He's like, this NIL era now, nobody's got like 2nd or 3rd string 5-stars anymore because they just transfer.
No.
And so like a team like 2019 LSU or 2020 Bama would be a 2-touchdown favorite over everybody in the SEC this year because nobody's got the depth like that. And what you've seen in the SEC, double-digit underdogs have been winning outright and covering all year. You look at what Vandy did. Vandy did to Bama.
That's Vandy, man.
Yeah, Kentucky beating Ole Miss. Florida almost beat Tennessee. Like, it's every week. It's week to week. And it's kind of, it's fascinating to follow. The only season I can remember like this was '07 when all hell broke loose with all the two-loss teams. I mean, this kind of feels like that. But this has got the
Yeah,
12-team playoff.
this is bigger. I feel like this is bigger because you're seeing, look, as crazy as 2007 was, and I was there for it, like, you're not going to have Vanderbilt beat Alabama in that year. I'm sorry. Like, I think people blow up 2007. What we're living through right now is completely unprecedented. I was actually had the weekend off. I wasn't at a game or hosting a show or anything, but I live really close to Vanderbilt, and I could like I was putting together a smoker in my backyard, and I could hear when they score a touchdown, they blow like a horn. It sounds like a foghorn. That's like how they've always celebrated, and I could hear it in my backyard, and I was like, oh, it's weird. I thought they were playing Alabama. Like I had like a different game on in the background. Then I flipped over and I see it, and I'm like watching it, and like, Vince, there's no precedent for what. But you look at the talent composite score from 247, right? That is on paper the most talented team since rankings have been created for college football recruits. Like their raw number of evaluation on that Alabama team. How a program like Vanderbilt, who was, by the way, 100% a hot seat program going into like even early September, every agent I've talked to in the industry said that, yeah, like they're going to have to make a change from Clark. He's not getting it done. He's kind of done this Hail Mary by bringing in this New Mexico State thing, with the quarterback with Jerry Kill and with the Tim Beck, the other Tim Beck, the OC. And it worked. And so I got a phone call from one of my editors, and they're like, hey, you live close to Vanderbilt. Can you get up there? Because it was like Haley's Comet. It was like something totally unprecedented. And so threw some clothes on. By the time I got there was like less than a minute left in the game. And I'm walking onto the field. Like I went straight to the field with the Vanderbilt officials. And like you look up and you see, the Alabama fans experiencing something they never ever could have even processed could occur in their lives. And then I'm watching, like, there's not a lot of them, as you know. There's 5 or 6 or 15 or 20 like 30-year ticket holders at Vanderbilt, like old men weeping, like the end of World War II had happened or something. Because I mean, that was the number 1 team in the nation.
Oh,
right?
they've never had a win. They've never had a win like that ever.
15 years.
They've never had a win like that.
And so I know things are shaky right now, but like what we're experiencing is just completely different for the sport. I am curious though, if we go to the off season, are people going to tolerate this? Are fans and the powerful people at the Alabamas and LSUs and Michigans and Ohio States of the world, are they going to tolerate this kind of thing, or are they going to try and find a way to create legislation that takes it back to the old way?
That's going to be fascinating because I know it's in Congress and they're trying to regulate it, and I've been kind of following all that. All right, I want to get into. I got a few hot fire questions for you. I don't want to touch on the LSU situation because you and I are both pretty close to the LSU program. Their fan base, I mean, we all know it's what they are. They're the most delusional ever.
They're very calm. They're very rational people. They're, as you know, Mintz, they're very measured people down there. They don't ever jump to conclusions or have delusional aspirations or expectations at all.
Yeah, I'm still. I had a pretty wild experience down there for that Ole Miss game, and some drunk LSU kid shoved me coming out the concourse, and it was anyway. But call me whatever, just don't touch me. But just talking about this LSU thing, obviously they've collapsed the last 3 weeks. They're 6-4. But going into this year, this was a reloading team. I mean, they lost Jaden, both first-round receivers, and Neighbors and Thomas. They've switched up their staff. There's honestly less NFL talent outside of Will Campbell and a couple other guys on this team than any LSU team we've seen in years. And now Kelly's under fire and everyone's under fire. I think it's kind of like they raised their expectations when they got hot in October. And obviously the last couple of weeks have been bad, but I had them 8-4 going into the year. I mean, I don't know if it had been the cycle that had happened, but I feel like they're all saying, BK ain't it. He ain't going nowhere. His buyout's a freaking $1 billion, and they're still recruiting really well. And I like they upgraded the staff a ton. I mean, I know it's like hard to say like be rational, but like you got to just see the course here. I don't know. I feel like I don't know if the sky's falling like people think.
It's not falling, but he's also, I don't think, the right hire long term, and I didn't think he was the right hire for LSU when he came on. I really like the staff. I think the coordinator moves, I think Sloan and Baker are very good at what they do. I think that given time, talent, and a little bit more consistency, they're going to be great. I think, look, go all the way back to Labor Day and look at that quarterback matchup between Moss and Nussmeier. And it was like, battle of sort of the incumbent backups. And usually what college football has trained us to think is if you're consistently the backup at a power program, it's just because you're a level worse than, the guys who win the job. Nussmeier's been great. I feel like Nussmeier's done really, really well. I think the defense is marginally better at times. I do think that they have suffered as of late. I don't, I'm not like a gambler, as you know, but going into that Bama game, that was the easiest pick in America because the way Bama's offense was sort of rounding into form fit the deficiency that LSU's defense was presenting. And I can't remember the stat off the top of my head, but going into that game, I think it was like once every 15 snaps that LSU defense was allowing a chunk play of 20 plus yards, most of them on the ground, more on the ground than in the air. And dude, that's Milrow. That's what they do. It's also why I think, I think it gave Florida a ton of confidence going into that game too. Lagway is not at the same level, but I can sit here and pick them apart. They're still better than they were down the stretch last year on defense. They had a Heisman winning quarterback and failed to support him on the other side of the ball. So it's in progress. I don't think Kelly fits in so many ways. I don't think that Kelly is a long-term answer in the Southeastern Conference. But there's a lot where you can still turn this thing around within a year or two span. There's no reason they couldn't be in the playoff next year. And that's the new standard, right? It's not about winning a division or going to a bowl. It's just about going to the playoff. And from a talent perspective on that roster, I think they could do that. They just don't want to admit they thought they were playoff bound. What, man? It's probably after
they beat Arkansas. Yeah, they were 6-1 after Ole Miss and Arkansas.
Yeah.
And so they thought that they could drop one more between at Texas A&M, Bama, at Florida, and finish 10-2, and finish 10-2 and make it. But
yeah, definitely.
It fell off. But like I said,
I really think that Saban win screwed him up bad. There is such a psychological, existential, whatever you want to call it, monkey on their back with Saban still. I think losing to Bama this year was really, really, the way they lost to Bama this year was pretty detrimental for their psyche, but also Kelly comes in and beats Saban, and they thought this was the turning point. Hey, we've got this guy that we can be proud of. He's very senatorial the way Saban is. He's more of an executive. He's a CEO mindset. We're going to turn the corner. And they expected that sort of instantaneous, Saban's year two at Alabama, right? And when that didn't show up, and then this guy from Washington comes over, takes over Bama, and kicks their ass pillar to post in all three phases for 4 quarters, I think honestly, I think it's big feelings right now. That's really more. It's more about God, I hate that I'm about to say this. It's more about the vibes right now, Ben, than it is about the.
No, that's what I think too.
Because
if you take the 10-foot pole look of it, they still have a shot. And I'm very curious what you think about Vandy at LSU Saturday night because. This playoff or bust thing you talked about, nobody's here to go to the Music City Bowl anymore. It's like it's really dangerous when teams get knocked out of playoff contention on morale. And can you get guys up? And LSU's like a 7.5-point favorite at home against Vandy. It's a night game, but I know their fan base ain't gonna be hyped for this game. They're eliminated from the SEC already, and Vandy dangerous. They're like plus 7.5. I mean, I feel like they got a shot to win this game. Might take the money line. Thinking about it.
I could see that. I mean, it's Vanderbilt. Look, you can say whatever you want about Vandy, man. They're so volatile. It's fun. It often to their own detriment. I watched the end of the Georgia State game. They lost to Georgia State this season. That happened this season. I don't know if Georgia State has won a game. What are they, 2-8 right now or something? That's the level of volatility. But it all starts at the quarterback position because they are. Look, he's borderline kamikaze suicidal in some of the decisions he makes out there. I've met him. I did a quick piece on him after that Alabama win. The guy's not big. I mean, that's why he's suing the NCAA to come back and make more NIL at Vanderbilt because, he doesn't have an NFL-sized body, but he's fearless. I think he's very intuitive in his decision making. They sort of defy the hot hand fallacy. If they can get going with some of the, I covered so I've done Bama and I did the Virginia Tech opener. And you could tell right away there was something really special about the way that he can run a drive. The way he could just start to feel it and how fast they can get the plays in. It's not overly complicated by any stretch. It's actually an old D2 offense. It's
Yeah, they're running the veer.
what Vandy is running right now. Dude, it's a kissing cousin to the triple option. It's not that much different, except they have the bodies and the experience at wide receiver, and they're able to pass pro more than a traditional triple option offense to where like they can actually hit you if they are in a 3rd and 6 plus. It's not impossible the way like a normal triple option team, you'd be like, well, shit, they're not going to get this,
No, it's fascinating. And I think one thing that I've brought up before that I don't think it's discussed nationally, the rule change last year about the clock running on the first down is helping these underdogs a lot because you can shorten the game because we used to have all those 4.5, 5-hour games where teams like Vandy just run out of gas in the second half. And now, like Vandy just they lead the SEC in time possession and they just convert every 3rd and 4, and it just drives people freaking crazy what they do. And I don't know. I feel like that's an interesting matchup at LSU this weekend. I got some other.
So, but I don't want to interrupt. You're predicating that you think essentially that it just breaks the locker room at a place like LSU? Because I don't think you're wrong. That's just something I haven't considered yet. You might be right in these last 2 weeks where it's just a total phone it in, like a week 17 mentality in the NFL. You might be right.
Well, I know it does. Okay, so for the schools like Ole Miss was the classic example, and we'll get into this because you and I talked about before the season. It's like such a big experiment because if it goes wrong, it's going to go all the way wrong. LSU didn't go
last year.
Yeah, LSU didn't go as big in the NIL portal. They didn't really spend as much, and their collective stuff is kind of, I don't feel like it's like aligned with the school as much as Ole Miss is. So I don't know if there is much playoff. I mean, I know playoffs are busted the mentality, but I don't know if like the Ole Miss thing. I always thought like when they lose their 3rd game, it's going to fall completely because no one's going to care anymore.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to see how teams do respond on that front, though, and how LSU responds this week. I want to ask Ole Miss stuff. 10-point favorite at Florida this weekend. I never feel good about road favorites, but I said before last week, I was like, Florida's got 4 wins. They're 4-5. They got to get to 6 to make a bowl game. They're going to beat LSU. That's going to wake up. Ole Miss is going to be up for this game off a bye, 11 a.m. Trey Harris is back. I'm not saying I'm laying the 10, but I'm not. I know it's weird to say because the We Are Ole Miss stuff, but I'm confident going into this game. I really am. I think Ole Miss's front 7 is going to get them, and I feel pretty good. I really do.
I would have been probably more critical of that pick had Ole Miss already not had the loss. And they already have the loss in Kentucky, right? They already have this sort of system check loss where they have to rally from it. And any Ole Miss season that's been successful in the last 20 years has that moment of underperforming relative to standard and then turning it around and sort of overperforming. I would logically, again, I tend to not want to I don't do any sort of professional prognostication or anything like that. But when people ask my opinion on matchups, I tend to not want to overcomplicate it. And if you can deliver pressure to let's say an entire backfield that has less experience than the ones that they've beaten recently, not to mention there's some pretty obvious system flaws within Florida to begin with, you should be fine. Now, it's a sleepy game. It's a morning game, basically. It's on the road. That tends to favor the underdog.
Yeah, I actually think that the fact Ole Miss, if they'd have had at Florida off the Georgia win, I'd be terrified because of all the, everything and the emotions. But the fact they had the bye, and I actually also think for Ole Miss, it's good Florida beat LSU because it woke everybody up like, hey, like this is a good football team. So I'm feeling pretty good about that one. Like I said, I'm all, the gambling front. I mean, I texted you about it. I mean, I banged Ole Miss 35-1 big on the Thursday before the Georgia game, and it went to 10-1 after. I'm not saying Ole Miss is going to win the national title, but I love the 35-1. I got a ticket to the dance, and so we'll see. I want to ask about Indiana and Ohio State because Indiana, I mean, you always love covering these kind of stories. And Cignetti and Indiana, this has been one of the most fun teams ever. I mean, like I bet on them literally almost every week this season. And I know they barely beat Michigan. And now this Indiana-Ohio State game kind of reminds me, you remember the Michigan State-Ohio State games that happened a bunch of times?
Yeah. The Mel Tucker extension.
Yeah, but just Michigan State had all these teams that would have really good years under D'Antonio, and then they'd go to Ohio State, and they'd be like a 16-point underdog and just lose by 45. That's what this kind of feels like. Yeah. Ohio State's like a 12
look, I don't want to be I don't want to be myopic about Indiana because I think everything that's happening there is good for the sport. But I don't know if it'll be as bad as that Mel Tucker year. And if you don't remember what I'm talking about, it was what, 3 seasons ago
It's
where
35-0 in like the early
Michigan's.
second quarter.
So yeah, and Michigan. This was they had Kenneth Walker still. So it's Tucker's first year, and it's the same deal. They come out red hot. They're beating inferior opponents. They're putting people away. It's all you can ask for, right? And they get into this time of year, and just like Signetti in Indiana, they gave Tucker a massive extension because it was like LSU was open. There were some other jobs that were going to open, and Tucker had a lot of experience in the SEC. So he was like, he was going to get paid or he was going to leave. And they paid him, and then they went to Ohio State. And the matchup between Ohio State's wide receivers and that first year secondary for Michigan State was like horrifically embarrassing. And that's the game that, where I think it was like 35-0. It's just like some point in the second quarter. I don't think that it's going to be that bad, mainly because Ohio State is like very like bully ball now, sort of.
They are the passing game. Howard's a good runner, but he's not. I mean, they've got the talent at wide receiver, obviously, but he's like not necessarily the best passer. And it seems like all year, Ohio State, they start slow every week, and I don't know if that'll happen here, but there's been like I mean, I actually had the Northwestern first half plus 16.5 last week just off that, but like.
Yeah,
I don't know. I feel like they'll be ready for this one. My instincts are saying Indiana's like a public underdog, and they might just get their ass kicked here. Is all I'm saying.
I think. I think if you're Indiana, you don't even have to. Like, I would really hope, provided you beat like a really terrible Purdue team next week, that you can lose this game in a non-blowout fashion. I guess we would have to define blowout. Are you taking? I think if they take a 14-point loss here.
It's fine.
And they win, obviously, they're fine. But I do think if we're in the neighborhood of like 4 or 5 touchdowns, this is going to be something the committee could use as leverage against them.
Yeah, that's kind of my thoughts exactly too on that front. I want to also ask, so this SEC, how it's going to shake out, this A&M thing, okay? They've got a sketch game at Auburn this week. I feel like nobody's talking about A&M, but if they beat Auburn and Texas, they're in the SEC championship. They're 17-1 right now to win the SEC.
Yes, sir.
I feel like the most A&M thing ever is to lose at Auburn and then beat Texas. I feel like it's just like
without a doubt.
Yeah, it's like they're a sketchy 2.5-point road favorite at Auburn, and then I could just like see them losing at Auburn.
What about this, Mintz? What about this? Here's the most A&M thing possible, because I do think Auburn is that bad. You win out. You go to Atlanta, and someone beats you, like we just talked about with Indiana, by a 2-score margin. So now you're a 3-loss team who played in the SEC championship, and ostensibly you're punished for it, and you get bumped out because you have 3 losses because you played in Atlanta. That is some A&M shit.
Yeah,
that would be like a sort of Murphy's Law.
Yeah, it definitely could happen. I don't know. I feel like A&M.
By the way, I couldn't tell you right now, gun to my head, what the tiebreaker situation is.
Okay, so I've actually gone through. I went through it.
Controls it, right?
No, I went through. There's a website that has the SEC standings generator, and I was punching in all the outcomes last night, trying to figure it out, looking at the odds to win the conference. So A&M, if they beat Auburn and Texas, they're in because they only have one SEC loss because one of their losses is Notre Dame. So they're in for sure if they win those two. If A&M. So if A&M beats Auburn, then loses to Texas, it's Texas-Bama, okay? Because Texas would have one loss and Bama. And then the other scenario is if A&M loses to Auburn, beats Texas, so Texas has 2 losses, A&M has 2 losses, it's Bama-Georgia is what it is. So Bama-Georgia could happen. Anyway, it's a lot of stuff to unpack, but Bama's sitting in a spot where they're the only way, like Bama's pretty much in right now is basically how it is. And then Ole Miss,
they have don't they have a scrub this week, Mercer or something?
Yeah, and they got Auburn, and I don't think Auburn could threaten them in Tuscaloosa.
No.
So they're looking good. Ole Miss and Tennessee have like no path to it at all. So, but I don't even think that's the worst thing. I think you just get to 10 wins and go to the freaking playoff.
You saw what Kiffin said.
Yeah,
I just wrote a column about it. I mean, you saw what Kiffin said. I think you talk about changes this offseason. The fact that, and look, Lane prides himself on saying the quiet thing out loud, like that's his whole bit. But the fact that coaches may or may not be saying, I don't want to go to Atlanta, that's going to piss off the league tremendously. And the way that What happens from there is not that the SEC championship game changes, it's that the league is going to push for automatic bids to the playoff. They're going to say, we want our 4 automatic bids. The Big Ten's going to say, well, we want our 4 automatic bids. And then they're going to have to expand the playoff quickly, not in 6 years, like within the next 2 or 3, to 14 teams.
I have a question on this. So, like right now, it's almost better in a weird way to be a 5-8 to get the revenue of the home playoff game and everything that does. Then,
Yes,
in theory, to get a bye is what you...
Dude, blame the bowls. It makes no damn sense. Blame
Well,
the bowls.
my question...
Why would you punish a program like... shit, I'm trying to think of a good example. Or just, what if you're Miami or Clemson and you win the ACC, hypothetically,
Or SMU.
and you don't make it... Yeah, and you don't make as much money as the Big Ten or the SEC every year. It's a big gap. It's about a $20 to $25 million gap every year. Why would you take away the gate revenue and the what we call the economic impact theory of like all the other money that comes in to a college town, like Clemson, for instance? Why would you take that away? Because you're punishing them for being better. And it's because the bowls are still involved in this system. The bowls have no place in the system, Ben. There should not be bowls anymore. We're talking about a 12-team bracket. I don't know how much I can swear in your show, but like...
Oh, you're on Barstool. You're on Barstool, baby. You could say it all, just don't rap. Just don't rap.
Oh, Ben. Oh, buddy. It's to me, okay, so to me it's fucking intolerable that we're still kowtowing to like the fucking Orange Bowl or the Fiesta Bowl. Like, why? Like, if you're Colorado or you're one of these schools out west or whatever, why would you why would you turn down that opportunity to have it at home and then go to fucking Phoenix to an NFL stadium with a terrible environment? And like that's antithetical to everything that college football does right and better than the NFL.
My other question, so the Bowls still have so much power. The obvious change to this is you make the quarterfinal games on campus for the 1 through 4 seeds that get the bye to reward that, and then you just do the Bowls, semis, and finals. That's the obvious thing.
Yes.
Because you're also asking,
but the bowl commissioners are going to complain about that because then they're going to say it's not a prestige event and it's too early. They're going to complain, oh, well, I'm not holding the prestigious Fiesta or fucking Rose or whatever on December 19th. I refuse to do that. And again, what the organizing body, which is basically ESPN, the Big Ten, and the SEC, those are the 3 real powers now. They should just be like, hey, cool, fuck off. We don't care. We're going to make our money. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It's all bullshit at this point. It's all semantic. Are you ever going to run into someone on the street in the next 10 years who said, we had a great year last year. We were the Fiesta Bowl champions. No one fucking cares.
No, I agree. You were the one that you started the idea of the bowl season week 0, man. I think it's like at a point where just do bowls beginning of the year and the big kickoff games, and like everybody would actually travel because people spend money week 1. People are so much more likely to travel week 1 than they are during the holidays. You could just have these big bowl matchups to kick the year off.
If you're Florida's probably not a great example because that's a national title winning program. I'm trying to think of a program that's trying to get to 6 right now. Okay, you're Nebraska. You right? You're Nebraska, and you get to 6 this year, which may or may not happen again. But let's say they do. What is more fun and interesting and valuable? Is it kicking off on December 16th in some like 30-degree weather in some shitty stadium somewhere against like some opponent you don't care about? Or what if you got rewarded and it's the week before Labor Day and you get to play, like, let's take the Music City Bowl, for instance. Like, so here in Nashville, the weather's like, it's great weather. In August, it's hot, but it's sunny, it's nice, right? When you play a bowl game outdoors in the terrible Titan Stadium, and it's 3 days after Christmas, it sucks. No one wants to come, and it's expensive. So why not move all of that to an anticipatory model, which is going to drive demand for tickets? Because Nebraska fan going into next year is going to be super excited, right? They're going to come to Nashville, drink the place dry, have a blast, and it doesn't matter who they're playing. If they're playing, Tulane or Memphis or whatever, it doesn't matter, right? That would be a hype game. And everyone would make more money.
No, I look totally, because the thing with college football, everybody loses their mind for 3 or 4 months all summer waiting on it. Everybody's ready to throw down week 1 because it's like a magical thing that before your team gets your first loss, it's like a thing mentally. And then once teams get their first loss, the fans change. So I don't know. I think that's something that should be discussed. This is all over the place, but I love having Steven on here.
It's just because people in Iowa are like really want to go to fucking Pasadena in January. And that's like, that shouldn't be the fault of the sport that there's snow outside, in Iowa, and you still give a shit about Pasadena. It's a completely backwards way of determining a postseason structure.
You've always gone really hard for the G5, which I've always loved. For the life of me, is there never going to be a G5 playoff? Like, it's ridiculous. An 8-team G5 playoff would do huge numbers on TV. We're in a sport where we got to quit. I mean, nobody's lying, especially in the NIL era. Nobody thinks the G5 and P5 are the same. I mean, it's a complete lie. They're in both in D1. Like, is there any chance we could ever get a G5 playoff, or just the bowl tie-ins and the ratings off TV are just too much?
No, because the people involved don't want it, and I can understand the G5's concern to a certain degree. This kind of dovetails with what's happening in the coaching carousel right now, because if you took a list of those open jobs, they're not good. The revenue is bad. The operating budgets are bad. The coaching salaries are bad. The assistant pool is bad, which is that's the amount of money they give you to hire all your assistants. There's going to be a reckoning when the House settlement comes in the spring, where some schools can afford to do the next thing, which is going to be this sort of like compensation stipend to players, and some schools aren't. Temple fired their coach in the last 24 hours. Temple is a school that, when I talk to sources across the industry, say they're seriously considering how to navigate the future, and the option to go back to go down, take a step down, is something that they're at least discussing, because I don't know if you've ever been to Temple, but there's no on-campus stadium. The facilities are ridiculously lacking. And I'm not a person who's like trying to bully poor schools into spending money on football. We just had a flawed system for the last 25 years, especially. Ben, you grew up next to ULM. I always use ULM as an example, and I'm not picking. We're in a sport that says that Louisiana Monroe on Interstate 20 and the University of Alabama on Interstate 20 are the same thing.
Yeah.
Are they the same in any way, shape, or form, other than the fact that they play 11-on-11 tackle football? There's nothing discernible between the two that shows that they should be peers and treated the same way. So I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a separation at the top, where these schools who can afford to compensate the players, who have fan bases, who can create 20 to probably, I think ultimately something in the neighborhood of $20 to $25 million NIL pools on average to be competitive. So you'll have that plus the stipend. Dude, the fucking Tulsa's not going to do that. So I don't want to necessarily shit away those schools, but we do have to be logical and rational in the way that we classify these teams. Now, here's where it gets tricky. Boise's going to fight. Some of these schools are going to fight. And some of these schools, like the way Boise is built this year, I can tell you for a fact that no team wants to see them as the 12 seed. That's a power run team.
Oh, yeah. Dirk Cutter, man. Great play calling. They almost wanted Oregon. They lost by 3 at Oregon week 2.
Correct. Yes. And that's the number 1 team in the country. So there are going to be exceptions, which is why I do tend to kind of like lean towards the English soccer idea, not outright promotion and relegation. I do think you have to have an avenue for programs like that, just because they have no history. Dude, Boise was a fucking JUCO like 30 years ago. They're not Michigan, and they're not USC, and they never will be. But I do want to live in a world where they have an opportunity. Dude, if Army upsets Notre Dame, I want Army in the playoff.
Oh yeah.
This is supposed to be a diversity of talent. It's supposed to be representative of the entire sport. And like where I get angriest in this sport, this is mainly a Southern problem, although the Big Ten is guilty of it as well, is this idea of like my league should have all the bids and we play the best football, so it should be focused on us. Guys, this is a nationwide sport, and you need to be representative of that, not to the detriment of the quality, but we have seen SEC on SEC national titles in the past that have been fucking terrible. The BCS championship at the end of the 2011 season helped shape and define why we have a playoff today, because Alabama and LSU put on one of the shittiest games we've ever seen.
No, you're not wrong about that. LSU didn't even cross the 50-yard line in that game.
Didn't cross the 50, yeah.
I was going to ask you mentioned G5 Boise and Army, this Tulane thing. I know you've been a John Sumrall guy for a long time.
Yeah.
Man, I mean, like, I know they lost the 2 games to K-State and Oklahoma. Both were games in the fourth quarter. I mean, I thought their win at Navy was one of the most impressive of the year. To shut Navy out on the road, that's like such a tricky trap game. They're locked into playing Army in the AAC championship. Is there a path for Tulane to sneak in, or it's just the fact they have 2 losses? Like Boise has to lose the game, right?
I think if it comes down to Tulane winning out and winning the American, then Boise would have to take some sort of hit. And right now, I don't know if that's going to happen just relative to what the Mountain West could put in front of them. So I do think Boise has a very comfortable and inside track on that. Now, I can't do the math off the top of my head, but I imagine there's a scenario in which you just bottom out the Big 12 and potentially you could push. So the way this is structured is that these conferences don't get auto bids.
I thought they did.
It's the 5 highest rated champions.
Oh, okay.
So if you have a situation where this year it's the Big 12, if they just completely limp across the finish line and they don't have a convincing champion, it's possible. I'm not saying it's likely, but it definitely exists on paper. The idea that like a 1-loss Boise whose only loss is to Oregon, or maybe an undefeated Army too, could both make the field. I don't think it'll happen, but it's possible. It could happen.
The Big 12, it's interesting because the Big 12 and ACC getting the buys too. I mean, you're looking at the 3 and 4 seed. Shout out Kenny Dillingham, by the way. Arizona State, all of a sudden, off last week winning at Kansas State and BYU dropping to Kansas.
Are you a Dillingham fan?
Oh yeah, huge. I think he's the man.
So Kenny, I've said this before, and I think it upsets some people in the sport. Like, Arizona State, to me, has such a high upside and a huge amount of potential when you get the person in there who understands Arizona State. And I think if you're talking about slept-upon narratives or storylines or whatever you want to call it, Kenny Dillingham walked into a fucking crater that was still smoking that was left by Herm Edwards and company. And his ability to understand how Arizona State works to make Arizona State successful is something that nobody is discussing. I don't know why. I don't know if it's because like Arizona State has this rep of this like super easy party. I don't know what it is, but like what he's done to that program is nothing short of amazing. I really dig the fact that he's out there on social media. Like one of his players, one of his kids is driving like some, I don't know, like piece of shit Nissan. It's like, and the hood was smoking. I don't know if you saw this on social media, but like the kid's car is broken down, and he's like, "Hey, right now, Arizona State family, let's find an NIL deal. Let's help this kid out. He's working really hard." That's how this whole thing is supposed to operate. That's how a billion-dollar industry like college sports should be operating. You should be helping your labor who's making you all this money. I think Dillingham gets it. I'm really kind of blown away that more people aren't talking about it.
Well, this is only his second year there, and like you said, he inherited that. I mean, he's got this team. They literally can win the Big 12. Like, they got BYU at home. I think Arizona State's going to beat the shit out of them, too. I think that BYU's kind of been a fluky trending down, and Arizona State's trending up. And they've got BYU, then at Arizona, a rivalry game they should win, and then they could be playing very well, likely to be playing Colorado in the Big 12 championship. And Arizona State's win.
I don't think anybody thought. I don't think anyone thought BYU SMU would be as impactful a game as it turned out to be. I think that helped vault BYU in the early rankings run, but I don't think that they have the depth or the skill necessarily to close it out. So, yeah, I would agree with you on your assessment.
Yeah, but the Arizona State thing's a wild story. They have a chance to get a BCS. But who do you think comes out the ACC of this Miami, SMU, Clemson little whatever the hell it is? SMU's fascinating with the NIL money.
Yeah, I think SMU's the most interesting story. I think Miami's the most talented team, and then I think Clemson is probably the safest bet because of the system that's in place, right? Obviously, their success within the league, so it becomes really hard to pick. For pure entertainment value, I would always pick Miami because Miami, if you are non-affiliated and you're watching Miami football this year, it is the most entertaining television product out there. I didn't say it was good. It is highly volatile. It's like watching a Jackass video. Like, someone might get seriously injured and it's not going to turn out well, or it's going to be something that you've never seen before. And that's every time I watch a Miami football game this season, that's how I feel.
Oh, no, it's the best. They get down in the first half every week. Cam Ward throws a pick first half, and then they just have these crazy second halves. And the games are in the 60s or 70s. Yeah. They can't play defense at all, and they just outscore everyone. No, it's certainly fascinating. All right, man, this is fun as hell. I love getting you on here because we go way back. Just any last thing, coaching carousel-wise before I let you get out of here. I know you're always very much on the hotbed of that. I mean, obviously you can only say so much, but anything to watch here in the next week or two?
Yeah, so the market, the whole criticism of the idea that the market is slowing down, I think is a little bit of a fallacy because there's always going to be enough money in the top two leagues in the Big Two. So I think if you're, I know people have said oh, it's weird that, let me address the Florida thing really fast. Florida didn't open because of Florida, not because of the market, not because of the way college football is going. There are Florida problems right now. People have asked me, the shortest way to explain it is this. The mess above Billy Napier is worse than the mess below him, considerably so. And that's why Billy Napier will be the coach in 2025. Once you get past that, though, I think there is a little bit of inertia because there's such a tremendous amount of turnover the last 3 or 4 years, and what we call it the Power Four now, right? Almost half of those schools are on a coach that's under 3 years. So if you stop and think about that, you just have to slow that volatility down. It's essentially like a recession market in economic theory, which is you just have to slow it down at some point because the growth rate can't continue at that pace. So you are going to see a market this year that doesn't look like, hey, there's 16 openings. There's a ton of Power 2 jobs open. There's a ton of Power 4 jobs open. It is going to be slower. I do think some jobs are going to open. I would look at North Carolina as potentially one. That's one that is very intriguing. And I'm not trying to be glib or flippant here, but there's always a surprise in the market. The NFL has not shown a ton of interest in college head coaches recently. It's been a little while. It only takes one GM to think that they found some sort of diamond in the rough to create another major opening. So it's slow right now, and most of the jobs that are open are sort of considered poverty programs. But I do think there's going to be a little bit of an uptick, and then I think there's going to be a massive – that will create a larger cycle starting in 25.
What about Arkansas is one I wanted to ask about. Do you think Pittman gets another year?
No.
Yeah, I would say that one seems – that one's
so – people – I think people have a short memory. Chad Morris nuked that program. I had two different unaffiliated SEC assistants call Chad Morris's Arkansas roster the least talented SEC teams they'd ever seen. So what Sam Pittman has done, both from a structural standpoint on the field, but also just the sort of off-field politicking culture, he's an incredibly well-liked individual in Fayetteville. They achieved above what they were supposed to this year. That was supposed to be the first SEC job to open. He also has a clause in his contract that rolls over if he's bowl eligible, which I know they have I'm trying to remember their schedule. I know they have Missouri left, and then they have Louisiana Tech this weekend, right?
Yeah, they have Tech and then at Missouri.
There's a really strong chance, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, does anyone feel incredibly good about Missouri these days? There's a chance that they go and bowl, and I think there's even more excitement going into 25 for Pittman.
Okay, because, that one I was curious about. And the last one I got, how long do you think Lane stays in Oxford? I got 2 more years after this year because his daughter's a sophomore at Ole Miss, and I think he's going to stay it out through her thing. That's my guess.
That's a harder question to answer than it used to be because he took it to the hilt with Auburn to a point where he's kind of the boy who cried wolf with Ole Miss boosters. They have maxed out the credit cards on Lane. I think there needs to be look. Lane needs to provide ROI, okay, and that means making the playoff and potentially winning a game. And I think that he could continue to sort of drumbeat for Ole Miss to raise even more money, to be more active in NIL, all that stuff. But until those things happen, if he comes back to Ole Miss in 25, let's say they don't go to the playoff, and he comes back to Ole Miss in 25 and says Florida's interested, which, by the way, they're not that interested.
It's Scott Strickland and Lane. I think Scott Strickland and Lane have had problems too. They do.
Scott won't be. Yeah, Scott Strickland won't be making the next hire at Florida.
Yeah.
That's another reason why Billy Napier is still the head coach. But let's just say Florida craters again next year. Okay, they vetted candidates this cycle. They talked to people and their representatives this cycle before they decided to stick it out with Billy through 25. Lane is sometimes deceptively higher on the boards, according to fans, than he is in the rooms.
Yeah.
Just, it's a fact. Like, he was never a serious candidate at Alabama. That was
No,
something that got
I know.
floated by his representatives. Have very friendly media at places like ESPN. They kind of tagged it after that whole thing happened when Saban retired and they went to Norvell and they went to Dan Lanning and everyone got a raise off of it and they finally hired Kalen. You saw Lane's name sort of get inserted after the fact. Like, oh, well, Florida State would have gone to Lane Kiffin if they lost Norvell. That's a lot of that is media manufacturing. Okay, I'm not saying Lane can't get a job. He definitely can. I'm just saying that he right now is in a position where Ole Miss is waiting to see what his market value is relative to, can you go to a national championship? And then they might say, the next time he comes, he might say, hey, so-and-so's calling. They're going to say, great, Lane, God bless. Because I'm going to be honest with you, there are other people who can do that job. I think he's an offensive play calling savant. I think he's a dynamic personality. He's very interesting from a media standpoint. I think he's a breath of fresh air on some social issues. But this idea that he can handcuff that program forever, I think, is starting to wane. A guy like John Summerall at Tulane is probably considered the next man up in the Southeastern Conference. And
he would have gotten – no, he had Kentucky if Stoops had gone to A&M. I mean, that was a wild thing, at least
still
what
does.
I heard.
I mean, if Stoops were to retire, which I don't think is going to happen, I think that's been kind of a bunk rumor these last 3 weeks. But if Stoops were to retire, yeah, John Summerall's in. But if you're John Summerall, what do you want long term?
Yeah, he's a Kentucky. The only thing is he's a Kentucky guy. That's the only thing with that.
Sure. Kentucky's a tricky job, though, man. Like, there's a lot of good there, and Stoops has turned it into something that it definitely wasn't before he got there. But at the end of the day, like, is there a limit on that program? That's kind of the existential crisis they have up there, because Mark feels underappreciated, and he has friction with that school, but at the same time, they've hit that limit every year, and that limit used to be called Georgia in the SEC East, but now it's just, they had an off year. I'll be very interested next year with them as well. But he has a massive buyout too, so he gets to sit tight and fold his arms and say, "Make me."
Yeah, Summerall's doing pretty good. The Tulane gig, he makes I think he makes $3.5 million a year, and they've got good NIL. These private schools in this NIL world. Tulane's not on the same level as SMU, but if you got money, you can hit that transfer. Those jobs are a little better than people think. Well, this ran like extremely
those jobs
long.
Are great, man. But I'm going to tell you, look, dude, those jobs are great, but you have to be able to maintain at those jobs to stay relevant. Because I can give you a long list of guys who became cautionary tales for having 10-win seasons at the Group of 5 level and not getting the big gig. Something doesn't work out. Like Seth Luttrell was supposed to be the next head coach at Kansas State. It didn't work out. He goes back to North Texas. He stays there too long. They start losing because you can't keep it going in perpetuity. And then you disappear. He just got fired as the OC of Oklahoma.
Yeah. No, you're right. It's the G5 thing's crazy. It feels like you got to just be 1 or 2 years, find a good quarterback, have a big year, and just get out. Because it's so like Boise's like the only team that's been able to sustain it long term. Literally, it's the volatility's too much. All right, you're the man. Absolutely. This was supposed to be 20 minutes, and you gave us an hour. Follow at 38 Godfrey across all socials. All right, how can we split zone everything you're doing? Tell the stories.
Who Killed College Football? Check that out anywhere you get a podcast. It's WKCFB.com to check it out. You can subscribe to it for premium content on there. Split Zone Duo. I have a column in the Washington Post. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Check me out. I make videos at Secret Base for Vox. I do all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and you got a big project in the works, too, but I don't know if I can say anything about that. But you're always got something up your sleeve.
Still in the works.
Still in the works. Fair enough. Well, thanks to Stephen Godfrey for joining us this morning. Let's have a hell of a day. Check out, we got Stool Stream's paper football tournament later. Fill out your brackets. I was pretty good at it in high school, so I think I'm a dark horse. Shout out Tyler Moody, Stella Blue, and Dude Wipes. I got a line out to John Summerall, the Tulane coach, for Thursday, trying to get him on. We'll be back tomorrow. Let's have a hell of a day, fellas. And, man, it feels good to be crushing that DraftKings. The crown is yours. Man, I love fall. The leaves are changing, football, and Stella Blue coffee. And this season, maple pumpkin pie. But my morning routine would not be complete without pumpkin spice Dude Wipes.
Oh, Mintzy, let it rip.
Cheers, furry fellas. Coffee that fuels you, wipes that clean you.